In her autobiography, Textbook Amy Krauss Rosenthal, Amy concludes with the following multiple-choice question. In the alley, there is a bright pink flower peeking out through the asphalt. A, it looks like futility. B, it looks like hope. Thinking about the future of the church on special anniversaries brings a song to my mind. A well-known old Scottish hymn passed on to us by Robert Burns, so often attributed to New Year's, Auld Lang Syne. Maybe it's the idea that when we commemorate how far we've come, we often are looking ahead too, hoping, in many cases, that the next chapters will include the kind of goodness we experienced in the previous chapters. So often, our deep hopes for the future include a desire for so much more of the same. The same warmth, the same community, the same love that we've experienced to this point. For we as Christians, in particular, even when the future includes death, with Amy Krauss Rosenthal-like hopefulness, we defiantly speak the language of life, proclaiming that death is not victorious, and that life and love and hope will go on, even though our body will not. That's the kind of hope that can take up a cross, can sacrifice, that can deny oneself and love one's enemy. That's the kind of hope that drives communities of imperfect people to congregate, whether in person or in spirit, despite differences and difficulties. It's the kind of hope that at its core says, like treasures hidden in fields, that humans were worth everything to the one who sought and found us, and who finds us still. That's the kind of hope behind Burns's hymn, a song that we sing to both honor the good old days as we dream about the days to come. After all, the future of the church is an odd thing to think about. It comes into greater clarity the further into the future we look. And yet, the church's entire existence is a testament to the climax of history which occurred even before the church came into existence. The church has never existed, not for a single moment, in a time when history's greatest events still lay ahead. We are the only faith in human history to say that God's greatest moment has already occurred. The church has lived its entire existence in the epilogue of a book with no end. In essence, the church has always lived in an Auld Lang Syne kind of orientation. The countdown has already concluded. The celebration has already begun. The new year is here and the new era has arrived. The party is on and the echoes of God's fireworks are already ringing out in our communities. For those who have stayed awake through the darkness of the night to come to this moment, what is the church if not a group of people who party in the dark, knowing that the victory has already been attained, and who are already living into the new? Jesus himself uses these kinds of darkness and light images to talk about the future of the church and to encourage his followers. While teaching in parables, Jesus encourages us that although the lessons are shrouded by the darkness of the world, like lamps, Jesus' teachings are meant to give light until everything has been disclosed and all things come to light. Then, Jesus says, pay attention. The measure you give will be the measure you get, and still more will be given to you. In other words, Jesus is saying, pay attention, because the more you pay attention, the more you will understand. Jesus hits on a similar theme near the end of his earthly ministry. Just before Jesus' final night on earth, he speaks in another parable to his followers, saying, pay attention. The Greek word here is gregorete, and it means something like stay awake or keep watch, to pay attention, like a night watchman or a lifeguard. Jesus instructs us to gregorete, pay attention, stay awake, watch. And then he describes the 4 segments of the ancient Jewish night. He says in Mark 13:35-37, therefore, gregorete, stay awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening, or at midnight, or at cockcrow, or at dawn, or else he may find you asleep when he comes suddenly. And what I say to you, I say to everyone, stay awake. Jesus seems to talk about the future of the church in the anticipation of light, even while living through dark times. And that's the future of the church still. Like New Year's Eve revelers at midnight, or children keeping watch on Christmas Eve, we will continue to light up the night until the dawn breaks, knowing that God does some of his best works in the dark. In fact, despite all of our light-filled hopefulness, the church is built for dark times. That's what is so often misunderstood about Jesus and his community of followers. It's counterintuitive. The kingdom of Jesus is understated. It's a flower through the pavement kind of entity. Mark probably best describes Jesus' kingdom when he calls it a shrub. It's unimpressive. It still performs all of the prophetic functions that the mighty cedar tree does, providing shade for all the animals under the sun, but it's just so shrubby. It's full of shrubby people engaging in the shrubbiness of life, partying in the dark. But you kind of have to appreciate that shrubbiness in order to gregorete well. If you don't understand the shrubbiness of Jesus' kingdom, you won't understand how the crucifixion of a king can lead to victory. And you won't understand why we party during the night. And that's the church's future too. It's shrubby, dark, understatedly victorious future. Even in this way, we emulate Christ, who on his final night before his victorious death, showed anyone who pays attention how to live faithfully and bring about something worth partying over, even if understated and shrubby. Jesus' final night played out in 4 scenes, beginning with the Passover meal and the First Communion in the evening. The Greek word for evening can also mean sundown, but it also referred to the name of an ancient watchman's night shift. Just like we have the graveyard shift in modern times, they gave names to the shifts of their night as well. The first was called the evening or sundown watch, and it went from around 6 p.m. to 9 p.m., right around the time that the sun was going down. Their second watch of the night was called the midnight watch, from 9 p.m. until midnight. The third watch of their night was the most creatively named. They called it the rooster crow watch, because that's about the time when the rooster crows. And their final watch of the night was the dawn or the morning watch, when the sun is rising. And sure enough, Jesus' final night plays out over the course of these 4 watches. The first scene happens in the upper room, in the evening, and Jesus' night concludes with the hearing before Pilate and his condemnation to crucifixion by the crowds in the morning. But we also see the middle 2 watches of the night referenced along the way. Just before Jesus is condemned, he stands trial before the Jewish high court, while Peter is on trial in the courtyard. Now, the gospel authors don't tell us the precise time, but we can get a sense based on what Peter heard. He hears a rooster crow. It's the 3rd watch of the night. Now, the midnight watch is a little harder for us to discern, but if we're paying attention, it's the most beautiful of all. After the evening meal, around 9 p.m., Jesus and his followers go to the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus takes Peter, James, and John and encourages them to gregorete, stay awake, pay attention, keep watch, while he goes off and prays for God to change his future. And an hour later, Jesus returns to find them sleeping. He encourages them to stay awake and watch, and then he goes and prays again for another hour. He returns, and the pattern repeats for a third time. And then Jesus says this, "Enough, the hour has come." Now, if we've been paying attention during the night, we can deduce that it's midnight. The scene started around 9 p.m., and Jesus prayed for 3 hours. So when he says the hour has come, we know it's midnight. But this isn't just any midnight. It's the midnight of Passover, the very moment on the holiday which commemorates when God freed the Jewish people from slavery in Egypt. It's the beginning of the Jewish New Year. And indeed, it's the beginning of a new era for Jews and for Christians. Just like the first Passover celebration ushered in a new era for the Jewish people, Jesus, in his understated, shrubby kind of way, has brought Passover to its culmination and fulfillment, the last true Passover. When Jesus says enough, he's using a word that can also mean sold. And sure enough, the very next moment sees Judas sell Jesus, the true Passover lamb, the true firstborn son, off to the slaughter to free the people. But we have to be paying attention to notice it. We need, as Jesus says, eyes that see and ears that hear and a heart that's open, because Jesus' shrubby kingdom doesn't force its way in. If you're not paying attention, you'll miss it. That's what so many in Jesus' day never expected. Despite all their disagreements, the religious factions of Jesus' day, from the Pharisees to the Zealots, all agreed on one thing. When the kingdom of God finally arrives, we'll all know it. So every year, good little Jewish boys and girls would stay awake until midnight at Passover, waiting for God's Messiah to finally arrive and free the people. And year after year, generation after generation, they'd have to go to bed with that flower through the pavement kind of hope, saying, maybe next year. And then, one Passover, the last Passover, the true Passover lamb and firstborn son, states rather unceremoniously in a shrubby garden outside the holy city, enough, a word which can also mean accomplished. The hour has finally come. It's time. And that's not only the time that it is, it's the kind of time that it is. When Jesus sits down with his betrayer and his soon-to-abandon-him disciples for the Passover meal, it was the evening. That's the kind of time it was. It was getting dark. The sun was going down. When Jesus says, enough, the hour has come, it's the time for the rescue. When Jesus is on trial and responds to the question of whether he's the Son of God by stating, I am. And when Peter is awoken by the rooster crow to his shame, that's the kind of time it is too. It's a wake-up call to all of us. And when Jesus goes before Pilate and the crowd and is condemned to death on the cross, on the surface it may seem dismal and depressing, but for those of us paying attention, for those of us keeping watch, the kind of time tells us exactly what is really happening. It is finally dawn. The dawn of something new. Light is beginning to break into the world as the sun rises. So that's the future of the church. It's a future much like Jesus' last night, where we, like Jesus, hold out hope despite difficulties and failures, where we are awoken by rooster crows and costly truths, where shrubby victories are secured as the clock strikes midnight, where we party in the dark, and where we live in that blossoming hope that the darkness is fading and the light is breaking in. And so, the church's future remains tied to keeping watch through the night, so we can live like Christ no matter what time it is. For our watch may also come in the evening, or at midnight, or when the rooster crows, or in the morning.
Here's to the shrubs.